and welcome to another episode of the Hey Dr. Kyra podcast. My name is Kyra Adams, PhD. I'm a professional earth scientist. And big update for you guys. As of a few weeks ago, I was promoted to the assistant section manager for earth sciences within the lab. So it was really big news for me. Really exciting time. It's been a big learning curve, I will say. I get to interface with people outside of earth sciences a lot more now. So people from planetary or astrophysics. And it's challenging me not only in the programmatic, like management type level, but also in the scientific level. So it's been a really exciting few weeks. One thing that I have noticed going into more of this like management thing, when you, I guess, go past a certain level, it's less about the science and the work and the business, and it's more about people, like earning people's trust and earning people's hearts. And I find that really, it's even more challenging than finding the next big idea in science, I think, because like now you have hearts on the line, like you have emotions on the line. So I think it'll challenge me to grow as a better leader and a bigger person. At least that's the hope anyway. And so with that, let's get right into today's episode. Today I want to talk about the miraculous ways I was able to pay for my undergraduate degree. We are in difficult times. These college degrees are really out of hand for how expensive they are. You know, we briefly touched about that topic in other episodes. And I know it could feel like things are closing in on you financially. And I think this is a sentiment shared by a lot of millennials my age. I see it on social media all the time. I see it on the news all the time, right? We make fun of people who are in higher places who are like, oh, you can't afford a house because you're buying lattes and avocado toast, you know? When realistically, the mortgage and the cost of living have just exponentially grown past what, you know, maybe an average salary could keep up with. And living in LA, in a big city myself, like I totally can relate to that feeling. I'm living it, you know, like although I work hard and I think I'm generously compensated for my efforts, we do live pretty much paycheck to paycheck in terms of like having to pay rent and keep up with all of the obligations we have financially. So I understand that that's the backdrop of a lot of people, especially my age, a lot of millennials, right? Living in big cities. But I just want to offer this episode as a beacon of hope, if you will, to just remind you that, first of all, your value doesn't come from the things you own or how much you make. And because we live in a performance-oriented society and competitive society, I know it's very easy to feel that way. But I just want to remind you, you know, your value is because of your unique perspectives and experiences and qualms and mistakes and, you know, all of those things combined, your preferences, right? Your interests, your whatever. Your value comes from that, and your identity doesn't come from what you own, what you make, what you have. And I bring this up because JPL, if you haven't heard on the news already, has had a pretty difficult first 2 months of the year. We've laid off about 700 people total. It's related to congressional budget cuts. So I know a lot of really smart, competent people are out there on the market. I've personally lost colleagues in the mass layoff. And so I know it's not the best time. That is where everything's booming and thriving. And I know there's lower morale, and I know it could feel like, well, what's the point? You know, like, should I jump ship? Or like, even if these big space companies or this big space agency or this whole industry is struggling, like, is it even worth it? And even outside of that, right, on a macro scale, even if you're not in academia or in the space industry, I think just in general, people have really felt the impacts of this gap between what we can afford with our salaries and what seems to be the normal cost of living now. Like, there's an increasing gap. But with all of that said, I just want to offer this episode as not only to you, but also as a reminder to myself for this financial journey that we're all on. So let's cut the ramble and actually get started to the actual story. So I want to actually bring up a verse that I have been grounded on when it was financially difficult for me. I've had a lot of different ups and downs financially, as with anyone else, I would say. But every time I've come back to this verse or saying, and it's really given me the strength and the foundation to keep going. And sometimes not even keep going, because sometimes it's not related to your striving at all. It's not related to your efforts at all. Like there's nothing wrong with you. It's just situations, right, that are outside of your control. But in those times, this has offered me hope. And it's from Deuteronomy 28:12, and it says, "The Lord will open to you his good treasure, the heavens, to give rain to your land in its season, and to bless all the works of your hand. You shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow." Okay, first of all, it has rain in it, and I'm a hydrogeologist, right? So anything that has to do with rain, it just reminds me it's not within my control. God will make your fields rain. And then the last bit was really encouraging, like, you shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. So if I'm borrowing from somebody right now, that means my story isn't done yet. And that just gave me the strength to keep going, to say, you know what, one day countries are going to borrow from me. I'm not there yet. I'm borrowing from other people to pay for this car. I'm not there yet, so my story's not done yet. So that was kind of the grounding verse that has kept me, honestly, for 2 decades now. I first found this verse when I was 13, and all stories aside, it's held me together in the financial realm for 20 years. So I just want to share my story. That's the starting point, right? Okay, so let's get started. How did I pay for these expensive degrees? Graduate school, we had a little bit of a discussion about the stipend and stuff, so I'll just skip that part. There are other things that happened during graduate school that that I would say just punctuated my financial journey. But in undergrad, you know, I had these miracles happen to me, and I regard them as miracles that really helped me pay for my education. And I jokingly tell people all the time, like, especially because I never dreamt about being a scientist, I always tell people, I mean, you know, like, God kind of paid for my education because I didn't want to do this. Like, I never really thought this was my path, but he made ways for it, and I had some alignment of my talents and interests with where I was going. So he paid for the education, you know. So if you feel like you're on a path where you're being led somewhere, or you have this calling, like, it'll be paid for. Like, there'll be ways, you know. But just to fill people in, I'm an international student, right? Or I was an international student when I was in school. And tuition for internationals are really, really high. So let's rewind back to high school, Kyra. I was in high school. I went to school with a lot of wealthy friends. I wanted to go to the United States and study abroad, and I knew this was like a really strong desire of mine. The year was like 2008, 2009 when I was graduating, like early 2009. But 2008, as you know, there was that huge crash, the global crisis, the economic crisis, the Lehman Brothers crash. That basically screwed over the entire whatever finances we had left, me and my family, in terms of sending me to America. One thing that it did was it really screwed up the currency conversion rate for us, for Koreans. And so it was just going to be much more expensive to pay for college, pay for my undergraduate degree. And so for my parents, like, we were not really well off or anything like that. Like, were normal, like we could afford certain things, but it was certainly not on the level of comfortably sending me to the United States. To give you some numbers here, I think at the time, Texas resident students, like domestic students, were paying somewhere around $3,500 to $4,000 for tuition. Living costs included could have added up easily to $5,000, $6,000 range, but tuition in itself was in the $3,000 to $4,000 range. My tuition as an international student was $17,000 to $18,000 a semester. Like, that's still a lot of money even now, and I'm sure right now it's exorbitant numbers that I don't even want to know. Whew. So when you're an international student and you get your student visa, the US government does this thing where it's like you have to show that you have enough money to afford the schooling that you're applying for or that you're saying you're going to go to. And it just prevents a situation for you to be stranded here with no way to pay tuition. They just want to prevent all of this, so you have to show like a bank statement. My parents and I had a pretty serious chat. They never burdened me with financial details about the family, but you could tell though, like you're in high school, so you're like old enough to kind of tell what's going on. And I knew it was a burden. It was a big burden and sacrifice for my parents. I know that they were working on other things, like I think my dad's company might have had some kind of assistance program, but it was still a stretch nonetheless. 17, 18 grand just for tuition, and then I have to live there, right? Living costs, like that's another expenditure. But we had a chat, and they were saying like, are you really sure about this? And at the time, a lot of my peers decided to defer their entrance just to see if they could ride out this really bad currency conversion rate. Some of the male students in my upper class, I think they went to the army. Like some of them went to the army to kind of ride it out as well. But if they were wealthy, it didn't really matter, right? But they were trying to gauge if I was really dedicated to going abroad, and I felt really strongly that this was going to be life-saving for me. At the time, I was dealing with a lot of tough things in my life mentally, like mental health issues, and I just said I just need to leave. I just need to leave to the States. And my parents also had separate confirmations within their conversation with other conversations with other people as well, where they really felt like, okay, this has to be a move in faith. Like, we don't have money to pay for this for the next 4 years that she's going to be there, but we have just enough to at least send her there now for like 1 semester or 2. This has to just be on faith. And that's what we did. We said, okay, let's send her to the States. And so I went to United States of America, went to UT Austin, not knowing how we were going to continue to pay for college. And I will say I wasn't always the faith-filled, like full of gusto kind of person when it came to money. It's really easy to live in that scarcity mindset or this poverty mindset or the mindset of lack. Like, people talk about it all the time outside of faith. It's like people talk about this as like something that kind of binds your mind. And I operated in that quite a bit at first. Some of the things that I did were so goofy. Like, I was so bitter just as a student, especially in the early days, because if my friends missed a lecture, that lecture is worth, I don't know, a few tens of dollars for them, because the whole semester is like $4,000. But if I missed a lecture, that's an expensive lecture to miss for me. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I can't even procrastinate. I can't skip class because I'm like seeing the dollar signs fly out, right? And I was scared a lot about spending money. So like $10 here was like a big deal. And so like I couldn't enjoy a lot of the things that friends do to build rapport and relationships, like going out to food, going out to get food, or like going out to, I don't know, frozen yogurt or whatever. At first, I really was scared to do any of that. And if I did do it, then I would have immense guilt. And it was just like not a good cycle for me, And I also knew that I was putting my parents through a lot of financial stress. So like that guilt is always kind of weighing on you. So I was, bitter, and it was goofy because like, those like printer cards that you charge, it allows you to print at school. I had one of those. And out of bitterness, although I had to like pay extra money to like charge the card, whatever, I would like print single-sided instead of double-sided. I was like, this paper's probably supported by my tuition anyway. So I would do goofy things like that. I mean, it only hurt me because then I had to like pay for single-sided prints instead of double-sided prints. But so I wasn't always perfect in this walk. But one thing I did do was look through ways to help me pay for undergrad once I did get there. And I swear, I probably scraped every single document that UT Austin had put out in terms of like school rules, school regulations, anything related to financial aid. So one thing with international students is that I can't get any federal aid. Obviously, I'm not a citizen or resident, so I don't qualify for any of the federal aids whatsoever. And in most cases, like state aid as well. And then a lot of the internships I wasn't qualified for because it was funded through a federal agency. Like, for example, if it was funded through NIH or, NSF, then I can't apply directly to those. But UT had these two narrow ways where an international student could qualify for a resident tuition. So if you do the math, that's a pretty big waiver. It was like the non-resident tuition waiver or something. But if I'm paying $17,000, $18,000 and I get the non-resident portion waived, then it brings it down to like $3,000, $4,000. It's a pretty sweet deal, right? And there were two ways to do it. Amazing. So I didn't regard this as a miracle at first, but I think just UT having those policies, having those exceptions is probably the start of where my miracle starts. But the reason I was hesitant to call it a miracle right there and then was because it's very narrow. It was like, oh, there's this road, but it's like very narrow, like the tip of my nails, because one of the ways that you could get that waiver was through qualifying through your department. So the way it works is if you receive more than $1,000 in scholarship internally, then you qualify to be recommended by your department to the university. And so it's like, let's say I got $1,000 from some other scholarship and the department is like, oh, you know what? You have $1,000 and you're an excellent student. We're going to recommend you to the university to get this waiver. It's a pretty sweet deal, right? Like you get rewarded for being a good student all around. But here's the catch. If you're an international student, it's so hard to get that initial $1,000 because again, it comes down to it's mostly federal grants or state grants or all of these things where you don't actually qualify to even apply to get these scholarships. And then the other part of it is these departmental recommendations. Good luck, right? Because let's say there are people in your department that got this $1,000 eligibility met, but then the school's gonna say, well, they're gonna go with the best student, right? So like, unless you have a 4.0, try like getting through that if you only have like a 3.8 or 7. Those are still really great grades. I'm not putting anyone down, but it's like in that if there's only a few spots, for the department to recommend to the university, good luck. And then if you have departments that are huge, like chemistry or biology, there are thousands of students. So imagine the excellence that you're going up against. And so when I found this out, I was like, oh man, this is not happening for me. I am not an all A student. But I kept that in mind though. I was like, okay, so that's one way. The other way that UT offered a non-resident tuition waiver was if you worked 20 hours on campus. Now, that sounds pretty doable compared to the other option, right? No, Because imagine, again, I wonder what the student body was for UT for undergrad at the time. I do think it was like in the 5 digits. I mean, their stadium alone is it seats like 16,000 or something like that. So it's a huge school. But so imagine all of the undergrads at UT Austin trying to get that one spot on the on-campus library, or like that one shift on the on-campus Chick-fil-A. And it was very cutthroat like that. Like, unless you were a senior and had some kind of seniority, or you had been on a wait list for a long time, it was really hard to get these spots on campus because it was just so limited. And even if you did, again, it's almost impossible to guarantee 20 hours a week, because the best they could do is maybe give you 2 days part-time. So those were the 2 ways that UT Austin offered international students some relief or reward. And here's where my miracle starts. All right, so let's go back to the first method. I had to qualify for this $1,000 tuition waiver, right? Or the $1,000 scholarship to get the tuition waiver. Granted, my grades were good enough, right? Guess what? The Jackson School, which I owe so much to, and I'm very aware of that. The Jackson School, I don't know if they do this still. I don't think they do. But the Jackson School is very small, and it has a lot of endowments from the oil and gas industry. It has just a lot of close ties because it's a gas producing state. And so there's been a lot of investments from the private industry to build up the program. And so we were not part of like the greater arts and sciences college. We were our own little college, Jackson School of Geosciences. And at the time, they had this internal scholarship. They were they had so much money. The school has so much money and so little students. And they had this internal scholarship where if you got above a 3.0, you just got money. Like $3,000-$4,000 in your account. Boom. I didn't have to apply for it. I didn't have to compete for it. As long as my grades were above a 3.0, and upperclassmen got more money too. Like, you just got a check cut out for you for $3,000-$4,000. This is basically free for the resident students at the time. And for me, I was like, okay, not only is this $3,000-$4,000 off of the $17,000, it gives me a golden Willy Wonka ticket to go to the department and say, hey, look, I have a golden ticket. Can you recommend me to the university so I could get rest of it waived off? Right. Amazing, right? Amazing. I remember the school made us write thank you letters to every single donor that had actually contributed to like our scholarship. So like, let's say you got money from the Adams family, then they make you write this little thank you card. And all my friends were like all disgruntled, like, oh, why do we have to write this thank you card? And I wrote those letters like always on the deadline, always with like my full attention. I was like, thank you so much. And also I learned how to write official letters, which was really helpful later in life. But I poured my heart and soul into those letters, and I still remember some of those families' names, right? It really meant a lot. And so the other part, though, that you have to qualify for is to be the best student in your department, right? Let me be clear once more again. I was not the best student type. But you know what was even more amazing as part of this miraculous story is that, I mean, when God says, I use your weaknesses, he really uses your weaknesses. And sometimes that means strengthening other people's strengths. Let me explain what that means. So usually you want to be the best student, but I was not, unfortunately. But because the other students that were ahead of me were so excellent, they didn't need this waiver. Like, I remember there was one semester I was asking the academic advisor for this recommendation and like asking her like, what are the chances? I do believe I got this waiver maybe once or twice. I got it twice. But one of the times I was like within the top 10% of the department, but definitely not the number one. But she was like, oh, okay, so there's like a few people, like 3 or 4 people ahead of you. But you know, so-and-so is funded by their government from wherever. And then so-and-so, oh, she's also funded by this other government. Like, these were people that were so excellent that their country's government was investing into them and their tuition was cared for. I legit was like, oh, well, I'm not one of those. And so they kept going down the list and boom, there was Kyra Kim. And I got the waiver. And so because other people were excellent, but to a level where I couldn't attain, I like hit that sweet spot. Like, is that a miracle or what? I think that's a miracle. Like, just, you could call it a coincidence, serendipitous, I have to practice that now, alignment of events, but like, isn't that amazing still? So, and I would go up to these people and be like, are you secretly the Prince of Thailand? Like, what? The government is paying for your education? Like, are you a prince? Like, or are you a princess of so-and-so? You know, like, I was amazed. But it was amazing to go to school with these brilliant people and also to get this waiver. And so that's how I qualified and got this department level recommendation waiver a few times. So now let's go to the second method and how that worked out for me. So you have to work 20 hours. And so I was looking for jobs here and there. And I knew I wanted to do some kind of lab work and research work, something academic as well. So I was applying to a couple of those, but then they were all full. Like, these labs had been around, like these professors were, you know, had already set up their lab. But I got referred to this newer faculty member. And because he was newer, I had room to kind of grow my hours. And I'm still very grateful for what happened, because he didn't have to do that. But I explained the situation to him. I was like, hey, listen, so if I get 20 hours a week, I would be able to go to school without so much financial burden, yada, yada, yada. And so he really worked with my schedule. And if he couldn't take the full 20 hours and he couldn't pay for that, then he would have somebody else take 10 hours. So I was working for 2 professors. But most of the time, he provided me the flexibility to work 20 hours in his lab. I did a lot of things wrong in that lab. I did a lot of things right. Like, I learned a lot, I will definitely say. There were some things I'm very proud of, but there were some things I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't know basics of running a wet chemistry lab at all. So I had made a lot of mistakes and blunders, and he was like gracious to like look over a lot of them. Schedule on top of that, like course schedule on top of that, like, I don't know. I still look back and I don't know how I did my undergrad. I don't think I ever slept. I don't think. Yeah, like, I just really didn't sleep a lot. I was taking 15, 17 credits a semester, and that's the other crazy part, right? I was trying to save tuition. I was doing a double major. And after, I think, 12 credits, like, your courses all, you don't get additional tuition. So, like, up to 12 credits, the tuition is incremental per credit hour. But then after 12, I think it was, like, the same number. And so I would pile on courses because I was trying to graduate as fast as possible with 2 degrees. And I mean, it's geology and music, so there's like 0 overlap. I can't really milk that out either. And so I would have to get like dean's permission to take beyond 15 or 17 or something like that. I did fit in social life here and there when I could. I mean, good things that I remember from college are all these like late night talks with friends and like pulling all-nighters and Kirby Lane queso at like 2 a.m., 3 a.m., all that stuff. Anyway, I digress. So going back to the story, because he was able to give me 20 hours, and I really think I had the benefit of not only his generosity, but also that it was a newer lab and I just happened to be like one of the first undergraduates he hired. I was able to get the tuition waiver as well. And if you're working, you get a little bit of salary on top of that, right? Like a hourly stipend. And so it was like a few $100, but you know, that's enough to make you happy when you're 18, 19, and you could use that to go out to eat with your friends, or do little things like buy a cute outfit, like one of those like Austin sundresses, you know? So that is basically how miraculously I was able to cover a lot of my undergrad tuition that is insanely expensive. A couple other things that I did was I also lived in a co-op housing. I know like dormitory is very expensive for like the official school dormitory. But I lived in a co-op housing, which is basically you live in this giant house. Everybody like votes in their president and has their like elected officials, and we kind of run it. Like we have a menu planner, we have a treasurer who like tells the menu planner like, oh, okay, this is our budget for the week. Chicken's kind of more expensive this week, so let's switch to this, things like that. We had a membership coordinator who would lead meetings on people to vote, like whether they wanted to let somebody come in and live in that house or not as a new member. So it was this whole little ecosystem that students had, and we had an overseeing organization. But my house was 120 people, and it was so fun, automatic friends for 4 years, really fun. But if you're an elected official, you get like a certain percentage of rent discounted. And so I served in positions a few times where I would have rent like up to 50% off. And that's a huge help, right? And food was included in rent. And so it was very affordable once you got it down to that discount. And I didn't really share with a lot of people that I was like, every semester I'm facing like, that's a $17,000 bill that I have to cover. And whatever my parents could help me with, I'm very grateful for, obviously. But it's like a big financial burden for a 18, 19-year-old to be thinking about all the time. But as you can see, like I've had so many doors open on me and so many favors, which I really believe that I was meant to go to Austin the way things worked out. And then in the last year, I was recommended by like the board of the school for like a fellowship, or I guess it was a scholarship for my last year. And I got like the Presidential Endowment Scholarship. There's a full name for it. And so that really helped with my tuition as well. So all in all, yes, the story continues after, where I go into grad school, start making stipend, and now more responsible for more things, and more ups and downs that came after that. But I just wanted to share the undergraduate portion of my financial journey and how amazing and miraculous it really has been for me. And I'm saying this with a smile now and able to share a story as if like, oh, everything worked out. But there were a lot of days, when I'm in the thick of it, that it felt hopeless, and I felt like I was against the wall, and kind of felt pathetic, like, oh, my friends are gonna go do this trip, but I can't afford it and I can't go, and there's a lot of discouragement that comes from that really messes with your psyche. But it's a really good reminder for me, even talking about this, because it's a reminder that the verse that I introduced in the beginning, it has continued to come true. And I'm still not lending to countries yet. So the story's not done. I don't want us to like focus just on wealth and prosperity and, being rich or whatever. But it's reassuring to know that my needs come from a provisional source that's outside of just me striving and trying to control and like do better. Because these things that happen, it wasn't a result of me being a certain type of person or working harder. It really fell on my lap as a favor. I really think it was a favor from heaven. So, okay, with that, it was a very personal story. I admit this episode is very personal. And I was a little scared to put it out. But, I'm not going to get into the analytics of this Spotify podcast, but it's intimate enough that I feel like I could share this with people. So with that, thank you everyone for listening to another episode. I don't know who you are, honestly, but it just feels intimate. So I feel like I could be more vulnerable and personable. So thank you for listening to yet another episode. If you're new, welcome. If you're not new, welcome back. Thank you for always coming back. If you would like to connect with me, my website is up. I know the links are on the description, but it's heydrkyra.com, HEYDRKYRA.com. I just added a Korean page to it. Woo! So now the site is bilingual. And then on YouTube and Instagram, I'm also on as Hey Dr. Kyra. So if you have any questions, comments, feedback, please do not hesitate to reach out. Thank you for being here, and I will see you next time. Bye!